Day by day, the ice was creeping over the curve of the earth, unimpeded by seas or mountains. Without haste or pause, it was steadily moving nearer, entering and flattening cities, filling craters from which boiling lava had poured. There was no way of stopping the icy giant battalions, marching in relentless order across the world, crushing, obliterating, destroying everything in their path. Hey everyone, welcome to Travel Through Stories. My name is Sean, and today I want to talk about Anna Kavan's much-lauded 1967 novel, Ice. Anna Kavan is a really interesting mid-20th century British author who, quite famously, was addicted to heroin and dealt with some pretty serious mental health issues throughout her entire life. She was in and out of psychiatric hospitals and went through all kinds of different treatments for her ailments. She had a pretty wild life. I'll leave a link to a pretty good biographical article down below. Now, this isn't really the personal details that I usually like to bring up in a video, never mind at the very start of a review. But I do it for a few reasons. Primarily that I think that these biographical details really do help inform what ICE is trying to do and how it's doing it, without simply just, giving answers to this book. But I think that most people, or a lot of people who pick up this book, pick it up simply as a post-apocalyptic sci-fi novel, but I really do think that it's so much more than that. ICE seems to me to be very interested in these topics of addiction and of mental health crises and the kind of psychological madness that comes with both of those, while also touching on a whole host of other issues, from geopolitics to climate change to sexuality. As I said, Ice is often described as a post-apocalyptic sci-fi novel, and while it is that in a lot of ways, to me it reads much more like a dreamy fantasy or a fable. It does engage with a lot of these sci-fi tropes and the tropes of the mystery genre as well, but to me this book is much more Nabokov than Asimov, much more Kafka than Clarke. Now, I don't really want to get into the weeds of genre, as Kavan is clearly playing with and engaging with different generic tropes from sci-fi and mystery, but she never lets these genres confine her. And so Ice doesn't fit into any nice single category, which is only to this book's benefit, as what that does is invite all sorts of different interpretations depending from where you choose to approach this book. Is it a post-apocalyptic novel about the dangers of climate change and ecological disaster? Yes. Is it a fantastic and dreamlike fable about a man on a quest searching for his deepest desire, a la medieval romances? Yes. But is it also a metaphor for the Cold War, for nuclear war, for drug addiction, for sadomasochistic porn, for sexual assault, for pedophilia? Yes, it is. And it's also so much more than that. And importantly, because Kavan is an excellent writer, none of these readings necessarily exclude the others. And in fact, they all kind of blend together, as this novel really is dread personified. I saw someone on Twitter describe this book as, quote, the most bad vibes book they've ever read. And I think that's a pretty apt descriptor. It's bleak, creepy, and unsettling, and at no point does Kavan let off the gas on any of these. It conveys that same mood, that same icky and unnerving feeling that Kafka uses so well and that Nabokov really perfected in Lolita. Ice takes place in a future in which the Earth is entering a new ice age. We're not exactly sure why this has happened, though there are indications that this was due to a fallout of nuclear war. This novel was published in 1967, remember? And so the world itself is freezing over, and there are these massive glaciers, these massive walls of ice that are coming down from the north and up from the south and slowly crushing all of human civilization. Instead of the familiar night sky, the aurora borealis formed a blazing, vibrating roof of intense cold and color, beneath which the earth was trapped with all its inhabitants, walled in by those impassable glittering ice cliffs. The world had become an arctic prison from which no escape was possible, all its creatures trapped as securely as were the trees, already lifeless inside their deadly, resplendent armor. And so we explore this Arctic prison, this increasingly claustrophobic world. But we, like the narrator himself, never quite get our footing from the opening sentence. I was lost. It was already dusk. I'd been driving for hours and was practically out of petrol. The idea of being stranded on these lonely hills in the dark appalled me, so I was glad to see a signpost and coast down to a garage. Just a brilliant opening that really embodies the feeling of reading this entire book, of being lost and out of petrol, but seeing faintly in the distance a single signpost and using that to guide you just a little bit further. And so of course this opening really signposts for the reader that we're in for a bit of being lost ourselves, just as our narrator is. And let's talk a little bit about this narrator, because he is an incredibly unreliable narrator. He's paranoid, he's anxious, he's confused, and we're never quite sure what he's doing. And in fact, he's never quite sure what he's doing. As at times it comes across as if he's dealing with some sort of psychosis or schizophrenia even. He has this sense of unreality permeating all of his thoughts, and he's often hallucinating, but despite all of this, he is on a singular quest. And it's an obsessive quest that he couldn't stop questing after even if he wanted to. He is an addict, chasing the only thing that he thinks will quench his desires. The primary quest of this novel is that our narrator is chasing this young albino girl, this glass girl as she's called. And he's in a race against time, of course, as the ice walls are coming and slowly crushing all of humanity. And always, on the surface, the indestructible ice mass was moving forward, implacably destroying all life. I felt a fearful sense of pressure and urgency. There was no time to lose. I was wasting time. It was a race between me and the ice. Her albino hair illuminated my dreams, shining brighter than moonlight. I saw the dead moon dance over the icebergs as it would at the end of our world, while she watched from the tent of her glittering hair. Our unnamed narrator wants to possess this young albino girl. He wants to possess her protectively, violently, and sexually. And while these seem kind of on face value contradictory, anyone who knows anything about abusive relationships know that they aren't really contradictory. Ice, like Nabokov's Lolita, is a study of a unlikable and creepy, yet entirely captivating and seductive manipulator. And so really at the heart of this novel is this extended chase scene as our narrator chases this young girl throughout the world. And so it feels like an action movie at times as we get these extended chase scenes. But of course this whole thing is incredibly creepy as there is this grown man chasing this young girl, and he continually, again like Humbert in Lolita, tries to rationalize his desires to the reader. So this young girl is the primary object of our narrator's desires, of our narrator's quest. And though we never quite get her perspective, as we're so often trapped inside the pathological head of our narrator, though occasionally we do move outside of his head, we never quite get her perspective. But still, the albino girl is the most interesting character in this novel because we never get the answer to the most simple question: who is she? Or perhaps even a better question, what is she? As the descriptions of her throughout seem to indicate at times that she isn't quite real, or at least not real in the way that we would assume a young girl is real. The first time that we see our narrator see this young girl is through a gap in the hedges where he spots her ivory white naked body kind of against a sheet of ice. An unearthly whiteness began to bloom on the hedges. I passed a gap and glanced through. For a moment, my lights picked out, like searchlights, the girl's naked body. Slight as a child's, ivory white against the dead white of the snow, her hair bright as spun glass. She did not look in my direction. And he goes on to explain that ever since this moment, he's become infatuated with her, and that he derives a, quote, indescribable pleasure from seeing her suffer, and that he begins to treat her like a glass girl, so that at times she hardly even seemed real. She's ethereal, ghostly, unreal in some ways. For our narrator, of course, she's very real as the object of his pursuit. But we never really get to know anything else about her. Her personal self isn't important. What's important is that she embodies the dreams and desires of our narrator. Her function in the narrative is, as one scholar puts it, rather academically, the expression of intra- and extra-diegetic voices that interweave and superimpose. She is a palimpsest character whose body, especially her hair, becomes the concrete expression of those multiple echoing voices, gives shape to them. I think this is just interesting for so many different reasons, as it just invites and allows for so many competing and often contradictory interpretations. Just like the narrator himself, we are invited to map onto this young glass girl our dreams, desires, opinions, interpretations, and ideas. I mean, this should all make us question why all of this is being mapped onto this completely innocent young girl, but nevertheless, the girl is, more than any kind of personality, an object that our narrator desires. She is a magnet for our narrator. I saw what was in front of my eyes, and at the same time I saw the girl. Her picture was always with me, in my wallet and in my head. Now her image appeared in the open wherever I looked. Her white, lost face was everywhere with its 2 large eyes. Her albino paleness flared like a torch beneath the malignant clouds, drew my eyes like a magnet. She is both lost and everywhere. She contains multitudes. It should be noted too that our narrator isn't the only character in this novel who is in pursuit of this young girl. There's another character simply called the Warden. In case you couldn't tell, none of the characters in this novel have real names. But this Warden character kind of kidnaps her and holds her hostage for a certain period of time. Or at least that's how it's perceived by our narrator. And of course, there are all of these other larger systems and institutions that at different times trap and contain this young girl as well. And again, it's unclear how real any of these things really are. There's a few different indications that suggest that the Warden and our narrator are actually the exact same character. But what this all shows is that our narrator isn't necessarily the only person, the only thing that wants to capture and contain this young girl. He's competing against all of these other people and all of these other systems and institutions. We often call these kinds of novels post-apocalyptic novels, but Ice is less of a post-apocalyptic novel and more of a novel that takes place during the apocalypse. There was a cataclysmic event that put him on this trajectory, but it's only going to get worse and worse until all of humanity is extinct. The day got colder as it went on. The sky darkened. Rising beyond the mountains behind me, ominous masses of black cloud were converging upon the sea. I watched these clouds, understood their meaning, felt intensifying cold with increasing dread. I knew it meant only one thing. The glaciers were closing in. Instead of my world, there would soon be only ice, snow, stillness, death. No more violence, no war, no victims. Nothing but frozen silence, absence of life. The ultimate achievement of mankind would be not just self-destruction, but the destruction of all life, the transformation of the living world into a dead planet. This book is, I think, insanely good. Its paranoid mania reminds me of Kafka, especially of his diaries, and of Krasznahorkai, especially his The Last Wolf. And the snowy, dread-filled atmosphere reminds me quite a bit of Tarjei Vesaas's The Ice Palace, and the creepy, unnerving, and predatory tone of this novel reminds me, again, as I've mentioned quite a few times, of Nabokov's Lolita. This book also feels at times like a Greek tragedy, as you're just waiting for everything to come together and erupt. Or, I suppose, in this case, to be crushed by ice. And the prose of this book is really where it shines, and it's wildly effective at achieving these different effects. This book does have a plot that drives it, but it's really the atmosphere that is so palpable, and the reason why I would recommend reading this book. If you're only interested in plot, you might not find too much in this book to really grab onto. But if you're a reader who loves reading for prose and atmosphere, Anna Kavan should be high up on your reading list. Before I end, I want to encourage you, if this book sounds interesting at all and you want to hear more about it, to check out the Spinecrackers podcast. Last year, they did a full episode on this novel, and they've done a full episode on one of Kavan's other books as well. And both episodes are equally hilarious and erudite, as are all of their episodes. One of the hosts, Gabe, calls Ice, quote, the best phenomenological depiction of mental illness that he's read. And they go through a multiplicity of different readings in a more in-depth and perhaps more effective way than I did here, though they also offer plenty of appealing critiques of this novel. Strongly recommend you check them out and check out that episode in particular. Ice, in my opinion, does capture mental illness and addiction better than most novels that I've read, and Anna Kavan had firsthand experience of both of them. But Ice also captures the anxious paranoia of the Cold War and of climate change, and the emotional intricacies of sex and sexual abuse, and it does so in a prose that is just so completely hallucinatory. It's a really short book, and it's one that I know I'll be rereading again and again as the years go on, as I think this is a book that will only get better with each subsequent reread. I should also note that this book has only become more prescient, more prevalent as time has gone on, as the effects of climate change and awareness of climate change has only increased since Anna Kavan's day. This eco-critical reading is perhaps the most popular reading of this book now, but it's important to keep in mind that it's not the only one. So feel free to click away now, but I do want to leave you with one of the lasting images of this book, one of the final images of this book that recall the ending of James Joyce's The Dead, but amps up that ambiguous existential dread to a global apocalyptic dread. It was getting more and more difficult to see out. As fast as the frost flowers were cleared from the windscreen, they reformed in more opaque patterns, until I could see nothing through them but falling snow, an infinity of snowflakes like ghostly birds incessantly swooping past from nowhere to nowhere. Thanks for watching.